thank you for taking the time to meet with me today. I'd love to hear more about your company, what you guys are working on, a little bit about your backgrounds, all of that fun stuff.
Okay, should I start directly with my background maybe?
Yes, that'd be wonderful.
Okay, so long story short, I have a pretty unusual start to this industry, which is initially I came from AI and from machine learning and all that fields. I joined a company called Chainalysis, which is known for developing algorithms and tools that are able to get anonymized blockchain data. So quite the opposite from what I'm doing today, which is building privacy-preserving technologies. But I actually really appreciate that because it gave me, off the bat, a really good perspective into how much privacy is lacking in this technology, and it is actually critical. After Chainalysis, I worked as a software developer. I joined the Cosmos. It is one of these layer 1 protocols in this space. And after that, that's where I met my current co-founders, Christopher Ghost and Adrian. And ever since then, we have started multiple companies in this industry. Until today, we are working all on Anoma.
Wonderful. Okay. So the premise of the company is what?
So Anoma is a set of protocols that aim to work as a substrate to enable human coordination on all forms. And what is curious and non-standard about how we constructed the protocol is that we focus a lot on the intents as being the most basic units. So actually, when users interact with a blockchain or when they interact with a cryptocurrency, what they have in mind really is an intent. It's what it is that they want to do, what it is they want to achieve. The downside of all existing protocols, including cryptocurrencies, the smart contract platforms, is that they are actually not supporting user intents, generically speaking. Usually what happens is that whatever the user wants to do gets in the end transformed into a transaction or into whatever logic that a smart contract can enable. But in reality, what users want to do is be intents. So an intent could be transfer an asset from A to B, or it could be swap X for Y. And there are many other ones that are simple. So when they're simple, with the current technology and the current architectures, you can actually enable them okay-ish way. But the reality is that users have intents that are more complex. So a lot of cases, user wants to do things like, I want to pay from A to B with this asset, but I want to do it privately. Or I want to trade X for Y, but I want the best market rates. Or I want not to be front run, or want some kind of notion of fairness. So in reality, user intents are more complex and they require more expressivity. So with Anoma, what we're enabling is this entire architecture is centered around user intents. So the basic unit is intents. And we enable it in a way so where intents can be as complex and as expressive as they want. So the way we deal with, no matter how complex they are, even if they require extra compute, for example, if I want to, user wants to send a friend some funds to settle for dinner, let's say. And in this case, this intent can look like, Alice, send Bob, I spend Bitcoin on my side, I want to send Bitcoin from my wallet, but Bob is an ETH maximalist, so Bob wants to receive ETH. So I can create this intent that says, I spend Bitcoin, but I want this recipient to receive ETH, and then the system will be able to understand that under the hood, there's this compute that needs to be done, which is the exchange. And I also, so this would be a swap, but the curious thing is that the user defines the characteristics of the swap.
Okay.
And they can add in things that says, like I want the best market rate when this happens, for example, or I can also add more conditions that I want this to happen privately.
Is there a general user interface around that, a GUI around that it says, okay, these are the parameters that we want to agree to such that that swap will happen?
So that would be a way of enabling a more accessible end user interface. But the point is that the entire protocol is constructed around whatever the user wants to do. You can express it via the code, but there can be on top of it kind of like a browser interface or even a mobile phone that simplifies the entire idea around it.
So how far down the road does this go to self-sovereign identity?
Actually, one of the main motivations that made us choose this architecture that is radically different is a lot of work. It's very complex, but we thought it was worthwhile because, to begin with, if you start with the intent-centric architecture, this enables an entire new paradigm for reasoning and creating applications, where it starts with the user. So. The main thing is that the user actually gets off the bat much more control over what it is that happens, and much higher assurance. There's also more flexibility if the user wants privacy or not. That's also supported. But this entire flow that the user only needs to worry about what it is that they want to do, and then focus on expressing that. And there is nothing between. And the protocol, all it does is take that intent and then realize it as it was described and nothing else. So either this intent never gets settled, so it doesn't happen, or it gets satisfied, but exactly as the user has defined it.
So what serves as the baseline for proclaiming that you are something or you are someone, an entity? Does that make sense? Like to start in the engagement between you and I, how do you create this like level setting of, okay, this is the person I know is legitimate, is a real person, a real entity I'm going to be swapping with, I'm going to be trading with, I'm going to be interacting with around, it could be something simple like an exchange of a token.
Yeah, it's the kind of party discovery, I think, is perhaps what I'm trying to, yeah. So this is interesting because so far, all architectures have been focusing on on settlement actually. And the way I look at history of decentralized technologies is that with the release of Bitcoin and it marked a new era of cryptocurrencies, then with Ethereum, it actually added more specificity at the compute layer, so you could program more kinds of applications than just cryptocurrencies. But when Vitalik proposed Ethereum, he said that he was kind of forced to, because they tried to do something similar with Namecoin and the colored coins of Bitcoin, and you could.
Way back when, yes.
You could, but it was clunky, right? The user experience is clunky. And what we're realizing today is that on Ethereum, it is a great starting point for all these decentralized applications, digital identity systems, and all of that. But the issue is that because they're not natively supporting intents, and users actually have intents that are more complex than just transactions, then the way to get around it is either, the best case is to create some components off-band. So this is what Flashbots is doing, and this is what CowSwap is, a bunch of DeFi protocols. They focus on a subset of intents and they add expressivity to them, just like trading. So don't generalize, but we are starting to see this tendency that the platform in itself, not being expressive enough to support intents, is becoming a hindrance to like decentralized applications. You can always do something where you make a wallet that is like expressing more and allows the user to customize certain things, and then in the end it gets compressed in transaction. But you're always going to have a bit of a trade-off with the user experience that you can provide with that. So that's one part, and the other part is that so far blockchains have been focused on settlement only, and that is a critical part. Like settlement is really important, but another crucial part is actually counterparty discovery. The thing is that in the peer-to-peer system, entire permissionless system that the central parties, you need to be able to find all those parties that actually have something that that when coordinated, you actually both achieve what it is that you want, right? Like trades, barters, even transfers are forms of coordination. So the way we designed Anoma is that the counterparty discovery part of it is fully integrated as well in the protocol. And the difference that this makes is that in Ethereum, the platform is not really designed to enable counterparty discovery. Just even when you create a DAO, even when you are trading an NFT, usually the counterparty discovery part happens off-band, right before the DAO gets actually formed, right? A great example for this is OpenSea and the trading of NFTs. So OpenSea is actually a website. It's a Web 2 platform, and it does really well the kind of party discovery part for the users. It's like they are in charge of listing, they are in charge of kind of enabling who can use this, right? But they are on the other hand good in enabling that part. The goal would be though that we move away from needing a central party to enable kind of party discovery, and that people can actually do this directly for themselves, requiring the least people in the various steps of the process as possible.
So something that's fully decentralized, right? Clearly OpenSea is a centralized party. It's bringing everyone together. You connect your wallet. You're doing the exchange. All that is taken care of. So are you chain agnostic?
So Anoma is its own protocol.
Okay.
We are going to be building and deploying multiple sovereign chains. And it is agnostic in the sense of Anoma is not set up to create assets on it. It is about adding this entire functionality for assets that were created elsewhere. So when it comes to interoperability, our vision is that we want to be as interoperable with everyone else as possible. So it is. I think for the early stages where I still believe that on Ethereum we're still going to see the first prototype into some of these centralized apps, and I think there is an incentive for some of these teams to remain in the ecosystem. But the way the protocol is designed is that it enables a lot of flexibility. So really, if the intent involves a need, we can still, the idea is that the user only needs to worry about interacting with the interface of Anoma, but you are, in the end, getting the guarantees and then moving around the assets from E or something like that.
Okay, that's definitely very helpful to understand the basis for it. Who's your general audience right now? Like is it enterprises? Well, you move into enterprises, it's just individuals?
To be honest, this has changed a little bit in the last sense. Ever since we figured out that this is the breakthrough with Anoma is the intent-centric and the declarative programming model for decentralized applications. Our main target audience is going to be application developers. So with the idea that with Anoma, everything that is possible in Ethereum, you can achieve with more performance, more flexible privacy, and higher assurance for the end user and better UX. But possibly we can enable more interesting applications because we are no longer reasoning through the constraints of smart contract. You know, we have to like calls among smart contracts and be like what are the limitations of computing that front. The new programming model comes from the fact that developers will only have to reason about what is the user intent and how does that interoperate with the validated predicate, and that's it. But this forces you to think very differently around how you build decentralized applications. So we think that there's a potential to enable cooler applications, more interesting, different applications even with the stack of Anoma.
So how do you get in front of the developers to help them see the benefit of this?
This is just starting right now, but the cool thing about developers is that you can go with words that they used to around, for example, imperative programming versus declarative programming. The idea of declarative programming is not something we invented. In the world of programming languages and developers, super engineering, it already exists. It's about the idea of you think of a program, you design it in a way where it does exactly what it should be doing, but nothing else. So in the traditional world of software, declarative programming is pursues to create applications where you minimize externalities to the maximum possible. So I think going for explaining this part, explaining why we architected in a way, and how this just provides off-the-go better assurance for the user and also for themselves. Just think about all these exploits. It's just really complex also for them to reason through, like what is the security scope of smart contracts, because you have to think about what if there's another application that later on forces me to call another smart contract that I don't really know. It's from the developer UX actually really complex, and you have to rely on like audits, formal verification offband, and I can never be sure. Plus the end user experience is always going to be clunkier in that sense.
How many total employees do you all have now?
So we started we started in February 2021.
Okay.
So like a little bit longer than a year ago.
So it's new. Okay.
We are right now 45 people to 50.
Okay.
The reason why we grew so fast is because Anoma is a very broad project, and we require some areas, cutting edge cryptography, cutting edge consensus research, and besides that, we are going for the full vertically integrated approach, which means that whenever we launch a sovereign chain, we're going to do so with end user interfaces, so we can directly get the testing.
Out of curiosity, how difficult has it been to find talent?
To find talent, I think we're lucky in some aspects, as in we're really lucky to find some researchers and cryptographers that are really at the forefront. And somehow, I guess it's because there are a lot of talent out there that would like to find projects that are just more interesting, perhaps. And ideally, if they can, they would try to get involved with a project that has, positive impact, is a net positive for society. And I think a curious observation is that a really nice side effect of this space is that it enables cutting edge cryptography to actually be deployed to technologies, to be well funded and all these things. Whereas in the past, if you were a cryptographer, perhaps you had to basically choose between joining academia or joining projects where ended up funded by the military. And I think some people were a little bit, not everyone would feel comfortable with something like that.
So you had mentioned to me that you're based in Switzerland,
Yeah.
right? Did you give thought to other countries to have it created, where you were primarily established?
So we are a remote first company.
Okay.
Our teams are spread all over the world, and we never remain remote first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because the part that I'm curious about is when you have this self-sovereign identity potentially moving in that direction, depending on what part of the country or part of the world you're in, there's different perspectives on that. So are you having to think about what other governments around the world are contemplating in that space? Is that potentially a threat?
I see. So I think there's a lot of things that governments could be considering. There's a lot of opportunity and a lot of properties that they could benefit from. So what we're building is a very general substrate. And from there, you can enable things, very simple things, such as simply a financial system that has flexible privacy. And from the government's perspective, I would actually focus a lot on the privacy preserving technology part of it, especially deploying ZKPs as knowledge proofs. And the thinking is a little bit counterintuitive, but I actually think it's because it provides a much better, a much stronger security for your nation. To be honest,
Totally agree.
imagine that today or tomorrow we move all the finance into Ethereum or move all the finance to Bitcoin. These platforms do not support privacy. There's just statistical tools. You can have a few people who are just developing a few heuristics in an analysis tools, and you can basically anonymize a big portion and then really monitor what's happening in there. So if we actually were to move all the finance, which is the goal, right, to all these platforms, honestly, I think the US or any other government would ban these platforms immediately, because then it becomes a national threat for the security of this entire nation.
But doesn't ultimately Ethereum with zero knowledge proofs create a bit of a threat for them anyways, or no?
I mean, you do not need to use Ethereum as a platform. I think what's more important is that when you move into this world where the target is around heterogeneous trust models, heterogeneous security, I still think that governments will be around and that there will be citizens that trust the government. So I think we should be moving to a world where governments basically define what kind of security model suits their needs the best, with the idea that they will be operating their own chain, with the governance structure that they want. Imagine something like in Switzerland, the way I would structure it is Switzerland operates their own sovereign chain for example, financial transactions. And then they spread the authority across all the different cantons of Switzerland. But they're all operating and they're all basically part of this governance. And this is the chain of Switzerland. This is not Ethereum. So they get to choose what kind of rules and security models they trust, who really is able to change rules and participate in consensus. But then make sure that for economic applications that involve the average citizen, it is interoperable with every other chain. So I can imagine how in this model, Switzerland will issue the digital Swiss franc. And then commerce or the different financial services might not be part of this chain, but might have the application elsewhere. But that doesn't change actually the current trust model, except that it makes it, except that you can add full privacy against other nations and against malicious groups around the world that can right now exploit the financial data of the banks by attacking them, right? And since you introduced the digital Swiss franc, actually it doesn't change either the way people spend right now as Swiss citizens. But what matters is that there will be applications that are on other chains. What matters is that you make them interoperable, so people can spend the Swiss franc in other applications.
That's an amazing thought. One last question before two questions left. First of the two is, can you imagine 20 years from now, two decades from now, having a government DAO such that the entire grouping of people, could be a state, could be a general town, whatever, it has a DAO that's based on whatever they agree to, and they can vote on things, and they can participate in that sense?
Absolutely. And honestly, but what I would say is that in order to get there, and in order to get to that DAO, even if it's focused locally or like more at state level or something, I think what we need is a better substrate for coordination and for counterparty discovery. And this is actually really the reason why we wanted to focus on Anoma, was because we wanted to solve human coordination, we wanted to bring in better processes that leads to better institutions via the process in which they were created, and by, for example, enable more complex voting systems on matters that really are hard. You can't really express in a yes/no vote, right? So it's about increasing the bandwidth of information through which you send in, for example, a voting system. And an interesting way you can enable just a new kind of institution can later on materialize in the DAO on-chain is that you use Anoma to basically determine the process of how that DAO gets formed. Wow. So it's not about the DAO in itself, but it's about the process and where you get to the DAO. And I think that is very important because of the legitimacy that it carries.
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying, no question. All right, any last parting thoughts? Anything that you want to discuss as the last thought?
This is more of a personal thought in the lines of zero knowledge proofs and privacy preserving technology are now catching more and more people's attention, and I think people are like more conscious. And I think I'm really excited about this because I feel like so far the model has been, probably due to technological constraints, we didn't have this cryptography before. We didn't have distributed systems as advanced as today. But when we came from the model of we kind of have to trust the central party, and we kind of go from like the data is available in public by default, I would like us to move towards a model where it is possible that the default is privacy is flexible, as in it shouldn't, if we ever move to, for example, entire financial system to decentralized systems and platforms, at least I do not want their users' current model to be broken. I want it to be better. And the way it's broken right now is that right now if I use my bank, at least my data is not open to everyone else. It is open to the bank employees and maybe the governments. But if you move it right now there, it's just worse. So I think it's important to enable flexible privacy because then it wouldn't change, at least the current model. I can still disclose it to parties selectively, and most like, and so I think it's just really important to move to the default of flexible privacy and just enable more control for users and people who use the services.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you.